It's been about 4 months since I did a reflask, so we're here to check on how these plants are doing. Stay tuned to find out. About 4 months ago, I replated some of my orchid seedlings into a slightly larger container to allow it to grow. Now we're going to check back on them and see how they're doing. So if you want to see how I went from orchid seed pod to these small, tiny baby seedlings, you can check out my playlist on orchid seedlings to find out more. You can also check the card above and in the description below to get the links about all of these videos. To give a little background, I got some orchid seed pods about last year and I flashed them into this kind of laboratory medium, and I wanted to see if I can grow orchids in the home without any crazy specialized equipment. Basically, I used a wok as a glorified steamer, and I have some mason jars, and then the only thing that I had to buy special was the orchid growing media that I got from Phytotech. Did several rounds of flasking, and I just wanted to be familiar with the process and also to lower my contamination rate. And of course, it took some time, and finally I'm able to share with you some of the results of what I have. So, Leo, come on. So the first seeds I used were the Zygopetalum Adelaide Meadows hybrid, and these seeds were very viable. Almost all of the flasked jars had some sort of germination. About 9 months later, I needed to reflask them just because I noticed that the growth was slowing down a little bit, and I wanted to give it a refresh of growing medium so that these plants can grow a little faster. So fast forward 4 months after the reflasking process, this is what the Zygopetalum Adelaide Meadows hybrid looks like. So they're definitely having leaves, they're definitely starting to grow those fuzzy little roots that look like real orchid roots, and that's a huge sign of success. I think this jar in particular is probably the most advanced out of all of them. Basically, these plants have been in this kind of setup for about a year now. And that is quite a long time for these plants to be in flask, but I know that just depending on the speed of growth and how these plants are doing, it can take shorter time or it can take a longer length of time. So for this cross, I flasked about 4 additional jars, and this one is the most advanced. I think there's like 2 or 3 more that are doing well, and they're moving along. Now, around that time that I was reflasking the Zygopetalum Adelaide Meadows, I flasked the Dendrobium samurai, and this plant has been growing super quick. I think because it is a hybrid, it's a very vigorous one. This is a 6 months growth in this plant, so I know that it is gonna definitely do well. I will be leaving this plant in this container for another 6 months and then see how the growth rate is. Otherwise, I will try to reflask. Since I usually sow the seeds fairly lightly, I'm not hoping for hundreds of millions of flasks and hundreds of millions of seeds. I'm just doing this at a smaller scale. So this particular jar, it probably won't need to be reflasked at all because it has all the nutrients it wants, it has a lot of space, and there's not as much seed and not as much competition. So I don't have to worry about doing that. So if I notice a slow in growth because it's using up all of the nutrients, then I will reflask it. Otherwise, I'm gonna leave it alone and just see how things will do. Now, not only that, these are the ones that actually have shown a lot of growth, a lot of green, and it's just kind of interesting to see how things have progressed. Some of the seeds that I have got contaminated or they didn't grow, and so I had to move them aside. And I've just been flasking seeds continually, just kind of creating rounds after round to just build my practice and to just build up kind of the muscle memory of doing this process. So I do have flasks of Brassavola, of Encyclia, and Leptodes. I will also be flasking Cattleya and Phalaenopsis later in the year. So that's going to be a lot of things coming through, and right now I just have a lot of the seeds in storage. They're kind of dried out. Originally I had them in these kind of plastic sandwich bag type things, but I think I'm going to be transitioning to kind of a more wax paper setup so that I have a better drying experience and then I don't have to encounter any possible mold or humidity issues. I consider myself still a beginner in this process because it hasn't been long since I've been flasking and I haven't had a huge rate of success, but this is all kind of the learning process and the process that I'm going to so that I can get better and kind of showcase how to do this kind of flasking process at home and kind of pull out the intimidation factor for doing this kind of thing. You really don't need a lot of experience, you don't really need a lot of equipment, and you also don't need to have a scientific background to understand this. I think a lot of times it can be intimidating when they have a lot of terms and words that you don't understand, but I would say orchid flasking is quite a straightforward process. The thing that you really have to keep in mind is that it takes a long time and you really need patience to do it. And so for me, I think it's worked out really well because after the initial flasking and all of these things, you kind of just set it aside, forget it, you can check on it every once in a while, and it's really kind of a hands-off process. So the most interesting part, I guess, is the process in which you are doing active flasking or reflasking or troubleshooting contaminations and things like that. But after everything is set and put up in the jars, it's basically a waiting game. So I really encourage you to kind of try this out to see what results you have, and let me know if you've been successful, if you haven't, if you've run into any kind of issues. I would love to know because I kind of want to problem shoot and troubleshoot with you. And I want to share also the things that I've been dealing with and the tips that I have so that you guys could learn from me, and hopefully it will be better so we can grow a larger pool of people who are able to grow orchids and grow orchids from seed better, and so we can share all these wonderful plants with more people. So after these plants have been all sealed up and they're flasked and the jars are ready to be set aside and allowed to grow, there are just a couple things to keep in mind. So first of all is watch out for contaminations. That usually happens within the first 7 to 14 days. And then afterwards, you don't have to worry as much. If you get contaminations after that, that's not because of the stuff that's in the flask. It's probably because the seals are not tight or it's not well wrapped. So if you have that covered, you shouldn't have contaminations later on. The only things that may happen is if there's some sort of orchid death, like if the plants start dying, then that will probably be an issue that will have to be addressed at a later date. Once it's in these jars, you want to set it aside in a place that's fairly warm and it has bright light. You don't need really strong, intense light in the beginning because the plants don't grow, it's not germinating. But after germination and you start to see the first leaves and roots and all those things, definitely bump up the light, and if you can give it as much light as you can, go for it. You can tell really quickly if these plants are getting enough light because you can tell by the leaf color. Most of the time they will be kind of a green, palish, apple green kind of color. And if you notice they're starting to turn white or bleached, then you know that's way too much light and you can back it off. So playing with light levels is not that difficult, and so far I just use standard lights, so I haven't had an issue with that. I've basically put it from 12 inches at the bottom to about 2 inches from the top of the lights, and just allowing those jars to get as much light as possible. They seem to be fine. In the winter season, when the weather starts to cool down, I'm going to put heat mats on it so that the nighttime temperatures don't dip below 65 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's a good range so that these plants don't suffer any kind of cold shock or anything like that. So far, it seems like these plants are really resilient, and the ones that grow well, and the ones that take a little longer, they will take all the time that they need. I'm learning that all these different orchid seeds have different kind of behavior and characteristics, and also their germination rate is kind of like all over the place. I'm sure if you narrow it down and you have more specialized seeds, like if you just only grow cattleyas and you flask those, I think you'll have more of a narrow range of how things grow and have a better idea of how they grow in general than if you're doing kind of like all sorts of seeds like I'm doing right now. So that's what's going on with my flasking project, and it's been about a year since I started my first flask, and it's been about 6 months since I did kind of my second round and just kind of looking at things, and I will just continue to keep doing that and share with you the results of that. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this, click on the playlist for Orchid Seedlings, and it'll kind of show you my process of how I went from orchid seed pod all the way to these small plants that I have in these jars here. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!